And hello. I believe we are ready to go. I hope everyone can hear us. Matt, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Woo. All right. Wonderful. Hi, baby. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm tired. I'm very tired, but I'm really excited that we get to do this because, first of all, can I just say congratulations on 200,000 copies being sold of this book in what, under 5 years?
Yeah, 4 years.
That's mind blowing. Like, I mean, obviously as an author, I'm like, I know how this goes, right? I know that it's not easy. And I mean, so much of what you have to do, you got to do on your own, when it comes to pushing and promoting and things like that. And, you know, when you first told the world that you were doing it, you were a blogger, you were working in Salem, Massachusetts. Your life has changed a lot. Obviously, I mean, we got married, but your life has changed a lot since you wrote the book. And I want to talk to you as we're getting started about it. Hello, everyone. People are trickling in. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I want to talk to you about how this got started. And I hate to ask that question because you know me, I don't like to ask the origin story question. But this book is so big and it's so prolific that, I'm sure you're looking back on it now and thinking about life and thinking about, how it all began for you. You have different perspective. And I know I would love to hear, because I have never asked you this question, but, looking back on it now, when you were that witch who was writing something like this, and that at the time, no one really had tackled in the way that you had. There have been a lot of imitations since. But looking back on it now, like, who were you back then, and what was the drive to create this?
So before I wrote it, as you said, I was a professional tarot reader in Salem for several years, and I was also doing classes on psychic development and tarot readings and things of that nature. Um, I started blogging, and so like this is the funny thing. So I started blogging kind of on my own website. And then Jason Mankey came across it and was like, "Hey, would you like to write for Patheos Pagan?" And I was like, "Yes, I would love to." And I remember when he like announced that, I was one of the bloggers, a blogger, not on Patheos, but a blogger that was big in the witchcraft and pagan community, made a really crappy post about how like Jason Mankey must be desperate if he's bringing Mat Auryn on to write, because nobody wants to read what he has to say. No one cares what he has to say about paganism or witchcraft. So um, it's kind of funny because it's sort of the opposite now. But Jason was instrumental in being that person to first give me a platform, and then the blog became really, really popular. For a while there, it was the most popular blog on Patheos Pagan. Um, and then Alicia, the acquisition editor from Llewellyn, you know, um, she asked me like, "Hey, when are you going to send us a manuscript?" And I was like, "What?" Like, I didn't even think about writing a book. So I thought about like what I would want to write, and I proposed an idea to them, and they rejected it. Alicia was like, "No, like we've tried this topic before, and it was a tarot related topic. Um, come up with something else because we're still interested. We just think this book is not the right fit for you." And I'm really glad she did that, because I ended up proposing Psychic Witch. Um, so Psychic Witch literally would not exist if I didn't get that sort of rejection. So I always tell writers not to, get too upset if, like they get their proposal turned down. Um, it happened to me the first time, and I'm glad it did, because, obviously Psychic Witch has had such an impact on people and their practices, and has a really a reach that has blown my, like, it's nothing like I expected. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I was just hoping, like, some people would read it and some people would appreciate it. I didn't expect it to become as popular as it did.
Yeah. I you know, the thing that kind of gets me about the story of Psychic Witch is that I know you to be a very kind like to everybody. You're kind to everybody, and you're very humble. And you even like kind of force yourself to brag, like when you have those, like I just did a 200,000, sales. Like you have to kind of force yourself to, because you're not that person who's eager to put your success in other people's face, and yet you're so eager to share other people's successes. So like I know you, and I knew you, before we got together, and our history became unified. But like way before we got together, like I knew you as somebody who was just like the nice guy. Like you were the nice person who promoted what you liked, and you didn't talk about what you didn't like, and you were more interested in sharing, like, oh, there's this new author who just got signed, and you were so excited about that for them. And like, and I like even going to conferences, like I hear people talk like about you, and it's like, oh, you need to just talk to Mat Auryn and he'll totally promote your book for you, or he'll help you get the word out. Like you've always been that nice guy. And so it's weird when you kind of get started and people aren't necessarily nice back, and it doesn't make sense. And and that's happens with everything, any form of success. People just are like that, and it is what it is. But I felt like how you weathered that was just so beautiful and so strong, and it was really inspiring. I mean, honestly, because you put the stuff that you talk about in your book into practice, and that's how you coast, that's how you got through the stuff. So is this other part of you that was like, no, you're an incredibly authentic person?
Well, there's a few things. So, I mean, I am like in person, I'm really uncomfortable talking about how well the book did. But when it comes to the internet, I take sort of a different approach, because I see my success as well as the success of my peers as being one and the same. It's not about, Mat Auryn, the Mat Auryn show, like I think that we're all working towards something that's bigger than any of us individually. And I can choose two paths to go down in terms of vibration. I can either sit there and be self-focused and feel jealous and envious, or negativity towards other people and what they're doing, or I can choose to celebrate my success and celebrate the success of other people and put myself in that frequency of success. And I think a key to that is just that sort of like being authentically celebrating it, because also like anyone who's familiar with the evil eye and concepts of the evil eye, um, the idea of giving someone a false compliment, or like being like, oh yay, when you don't really mean it, is casting the evil eye. And I think that's what happens a lot in a lot of communities. Our people are casting the evil eye, and when you cast it, you can't separate yourself from that vibration. So I think that it affects one's own work. In terms of, I had a lot of mixed bag kind of writing this book and this book coming out. On one hand, I had a lot of support. I had a lot of amazing people cheerleading me and supporting it. And then I had, obviously the crappy people. And I was telling a friend recently, some of my greatest teachers on this path have been people that have served as examples of what I don't want to be and how I don't want to treat other people. Um, and so, I think back to like that really crappy comment, which, obviously 4 years later, or 5 years later, I guess, because it was like 6 years later. I don't know how long I wrote for Pathos before the book was written, but obviously I'm still mentioning it because it affects me. But I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be the person tearing someone down, or cutting them down. Like if I think someone's doing work that is not good, or they made something that I don't like, I just won't mention it. I just won't give it attention. I'll focus on work by people that I think are doing great work and that have things that other people will genuinely be helped on in this path by reading.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, the thing I can say just from knowing you for all these years is that you've helped me a lot with that. Like just with focusing on the good things and the things that I can create versus the destructive feelings that I feel around me when I'm comparing myself to others. And I think your book was so cool that it came out when it did, because we hit the pandemic, right? So we have you have all of this work to build up to promote the book and everything. You write the book and it's so hard. It's like a year and a half, and then it launches, and then pandemic. And it it came out at this time when we all were kind of plunged into a bunch of soul searching.
Mhm.
And I know I found myself reading it and picking it up like in secret, because I couldn't dare be like, I'm reading your book again. But I was reading your book and I was having these moments of like, oh no, I need to be focusing on me. I need to be focusing on what I want to manifest and what I want to create, because this is all impacting my psychic abilities.
Mhm.
And that was a really important thing. And so it's a touchstone for me. Like I still go to your book and I still look up things, and I'm referencing it in all of my books and things now. It's something that I think came out at the right time, and it said the right things when people were going through a really dark era. You know
It
what I mean?
it came out in a weird time, both in a good and a bad way. In a good way because everyone was stuck at home, with lockdown from the pandemic, and a lot of people were sort of looking for books to read and things to do during the pandemic, as well as a lot of people had to like sort of confront themselves when in ways that they didn't have to before lockdown. So in some regards, it was good because it reached people at that time. On the downfall, I had a lot of plans for this book that had to be canceled because of the pandemic. Christopher Penzak, our friend, was generous enough to like he helped set up a whole tour with me. Like we were going to tour during 2020 to help promote my book, and it just obviously didn't happen because there was no travel, and I moved across the country. Um, so yeah, it was a weird time, but I kind of feel like, obviously that is what it was meant to do. It sounds really woo, and I don't want it to sound like arrogant or delusional, but like I do believe this work is my true will. And I encoded that into the book. So there's a lot of things that I encode into my book as spells for myself. And one of the things was I put 93 exercises because 93 in Thelema is true will. Um, and so like I feel that the synchronicity of it coming out at just the right time was, I feel like something else was at play with that for it to reach people.
I 100% agree. Just as an outside observer, I would 100% agree. All right. Well, it looks like people have joined us, and then now people have kind of filed in. So I just want to
Yay.
just give a shout out to Tom Owen. Thanks for being here. Yannick, thank you for being here. I hope I said your name right. Michelle, it is always good to see you, honey. Lots of love to you. I have a whole thing I need to send to you. Caitlin, you are just on top of it. Caitlin is always here for these discussions. Your presence is so appreciated. Thank you. Debbie Conley, thank you for being here from Australia. That is freaking cool.
Yes.
John, of course, John Boy's just getting off of work and going straight from clocking out to clocking into this discussions. John, we love you. Thank you so much. Derek, thank you for being here. And and some other people are trickling in and out. Bonnie, hello and welcome. Okay, so everybody, thank you for being here. We really do appreciate that you're spending your time with us. And I think this is a really special thing because you don't really do the long discussion thing. Like you're not a small talk person. So like you've never sat down to just really dive into Psychic Witch before in this way. So I feel honored. I also know that like I mean, if you weren't going to do it for me, right, or if you weren't going to do it with me, then who was right? How's it going to happen? So I'm so glad that you're doing this, because Matt, people love this book, and it really has changed a lot of people's lives. So I'm glad we get to have this discussion, and then we'll get to share it with the world later. Okay, so just a reminder, everybody, if you have questions about the specific chapters or anything that we're going through, please go ahead and put those into the comments, and then I will bring those up when I can. Okay, and you also might hear my space heater kicking on, and I will try to turn it off, but if you hear it, I'm sorry. Okay, so first of all, you had this really amazing author write the foreword to the book. No, I'm kidding. As you all know, I wrote the foreword, and it was actually a big honor. This is all before he and I had a relationship that was, like we have now. And I was just honored that this guy who I had met, who was really, honestly, like, the book was so freaking cool when I read it. I was just honored that you wanted me to be part of it at all. Like, it was just amazing. So thank you for that opportunity. If I haven't said that, thank you very much. Okay, so let's get into it. So the premise of the book is really simple. To me, like, it's a very simple premise, and it's that psychic ability and magic ability are our birthright as human beings, and that everybody is psychic.
Yes.
And that's an important message, because as I'm finding myself talking about and writing right now in a new project, it's actually really scary when you have abilities and you don't know how to use them, or don't understand that they are interacting with the world around you. And so when you take this premise that we're all psychic, you're also taking the step of giving everybody information on how to, like, get control of their psychic abilities and to put them into a useful direction. So if to kind of summarize, because we got a lot of book to cover, but you wrote the book here, right? So if you were to summarize what that means to you and where that came from, just in your mind, and how that kind of collected and coalesced, how would you explain that the core concept of what's going on here with Psychic Witch?
Okay, I will try to be succinct. So yes, I believe that psychic ability and magical ability is a birthright. I believe it's two sides of the same coin. I see it as energetic input or energetic output. I do believe that it is a birthright. I don't think it's a gift. I think some people are naturally inclined to it, just like some people are naturally artistic, or some people are naturally good at sports. But as we know with those things, you can also develop it through practice. So it, I think a really easy way to illustrate this is that, I believe, and I think a lot of witches watching believe, that we're spirits before we're born, and we're spirits in body, and then we're spirits after death. And if you think about, like, well, how do spirits communicate? How do spirits interact? It's all through things that we recognize as psychic ability. So, for example, like, anyone who does mediumship, or anyone who has gone to a medium, knows that the way that the information is conveyed is through the psychic faculties. So I believe that that is our natural mode as spirits of how we speak and how we perceive and interact. And I think that, so I even talk in the book how I don't like the term extra sensory perception, because I think it's the other way around. I think when we're born, those are crystallized as sort of our primary senses. So I believe that our psychic senses are extended into our physical senses, like sight, smell, stuff of that nature. But as I discussed in the book, most people lose touch of that in childhood, usually around the age 7 or 8. And I also discuss how it's interesting, because that's also um, the age where the child's brain stops being primarily in alpha and starts going into beta, which is what we consider normal waking consciousness. But sociologically, it's also the time when a child has a strong perception and understanding that how they interact and how they talk about things, how they present themselves, people form an opinion of them based on that and treat them a certain way. So I think that because of the type of culture that we're in, You know, there's a lot of deep there's a lot of like deprogramming out of that.
Mhm.
Whereas if you look at, other cultures that aren't necessarily as secular or as religiously dominated, they have a much more open sort of
Mhm.
view and interaction with, ideas of spirits and abilities and dream time and things of that nature.
Yeah. So the first chapter is the power of the sight, or the power and the sight, rather. Sorry.
Yeah.
And it's as you talk about brainwaves, you talk about that childhood kind of wonder, and you give some really great exercises like affirmations and things to help with neuroplasticity, so that we can really reach into that brainwave state of alpha when we need to. Um, but to me, the part of this chapter that really stuck out was your concepts on reality. And
Mhm.
I think this is such an important thing as witches. And we talked a little bit about this last month when we had Jason on in the book club, and we were talking about just perception and perceiving reality. And I again, I like the way that you go into it. I like the way that you look at reality, because reality very much impacts the way that we see, right? I mean, it is the perception of what we see and how we're putting it all together, but it's also how we see through our witch eyes, through our witch senses, our psychic abilities. Can you talk to us a little bit about when we're in the consideration of reality and perceiving reality? Can you talk to us about like things that you find to be maybe traps for witches who are developing their skills when it comes to how they perceive reality or how they choose to interact with that
Um,
I'm
yeah.
throwing
So, I mean, that's a very open
yeah,
question.
exactly, yeah, totally.
I think it depends on the person and how they're interacting with reality.
Hmm.
Because it could go one of two ways. Either they could be too closed off, or they could have no sense of discernment and just sort of like an incredibly overactive imagination. Um, which is where it gets into tricky territory, because the border between imagination and psychic ability is so thin and so flimsy. And developing that discernment, there's not really a guide for that other than experience. You start to see through your experience with the psychic abilities, and your psychic experiences what resonates as valid and true, and then what ends up being misses, and you start to sort of it's really hard to put into words, but it's like you start to develop sort of an understanding of when something is coming to you psychically, and when something is just sort of your mind fabricating something. Um, and, I think it's a little bit easier when it comes to terms of spirit work, but this book is not focused on spirit
Hmm.
work, because it's very much like learn to walk before you jump into a pool. Um, but yeah, and then the other is, one of the reasons that I put such an emphasis at the very beginning of neuroplasticity and affirmations, which, affirmations people think as very new agey and very non-witchy. But I go through the science of it, of the neuroplasticity of it's literally how you wire your brain to think,
Hmm.
through prolonged use. But also when you go into sort of the more esoteric terms, you're creating thought forms within your own energetic field, thought forms in the loosest sense, not thought
Hmm.
forms as in like entities you're creating, but forms of thought that crystallize in your aura. And so you can either feed it to be helping you with your psychic ability and your magical ability, or you could be feeding it to hinder
Hmm.
you.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I would, while I hear you, you say that this is teaching people how to walk before they can run, but I actually feel like more so this is sharpening the knives that are already in your kitchen that have gone dull. And that's really what we're doing here. Like, to me, that's what this
Yeah.
is. And that's because yeah, that's what it means to me. Okay, so when we go into chapter 2, we get into meditation and relaxation. you cover open-minded attitude and focused flow, not force, which I want to talk about in a second, and then the breath of life. And it's a pretty short chapter. It's like we can get through it. It's very digestible. And out of all of what you talked about, to me, the focus, flow, not force is probably, I don't want to say it's groundbreaking, but it kind of goes against what we're normally introduced to when we start working with energy. So can we talk about focus, flow, not force,
Yeah.
and why you think that approach is so valuable?
I have my own personal theories. I believe this to be true through experience and through leading people through this. Um, but why? My theories are that it has to deal with the alpha brainwave state. I think when we're trying too hard to pick up something psychically, or trying too hard to visualize, or trying too hard to meditate, you kind of step out of the right brain state, and you start getting into sort of a more um, what are the words I'm trying to use? A lot more of sort of a beta slash, left brain, even though I know there's not really a right brain, left brain dichotomy like that. But I think everyone knows what I mean by left brain. Um, you know, Psychic ability, psychic perception, especially at the very beginning, energy work, things of that nature, is subtle. And you need to be in a relaxed, receptive state, an open state to perceive that subtleness, to feel it. And if you're pushing too hard, you're bypassing the subtle. And so you end up missing a lot of, the information that's right there. So a lot of it has to deal with being in that brainwave state that's just sort of passive and receptive, focused, but not trying to force the experience to happen, but being open to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such an important skill, because it really is kind of a skill, right? And it's such an important skill that I feel like so many people just don't embrace. Like it really should be a very fluid kind of experience. I love how you write about it. I love the things you're saying in it. Moving right along, because we have 14 chapters to go through. So moving right along, going into chapter 3, which is tuning in. So just a real quick kind of summary of the chapter was avoiding burnout and magical impact, deeply rooted in branching out. That's a wonderful, beautiful foundational exercise, right? Or approach. Energetic stability, brainwave entrainment, and closing down. And to me, what all of this I mean, it's obviously how to tune in and how to establish a connection and keep it there. But the emphasis really felt like it was on stability and balance and how to keep that as a psychic being.
So it's interesting because this is naturally what I was going to start talking to next is
Perfect.
the the burnout, but also what's termed as magical impact. Because I think we all know those people who are super spiritual, and they get super spiritual, and they get super into it and start doing all these really weird advanced things. And then they just kind of, something like pops, something fries in them, and then suddenly it's sort of like they become delusional and paranoid. They might start talking about like lizard people ruling the earth, or like like just really, like, they start to lose touch with reality. And so the purpose of this chapter is not just how to open up before psychic or magical practices, but how to make sure that you're doing it in a safe way. One of the things that is troublesome with any sort of spiritual discussion, whether it's in the occult or even broader, is sometimes we use the same word for something, but we mean something different by that word. For me, one of the big ones is intuition, but specifically what I'm talking about here is grounding. So a lot of people, a lot of the books that I grew up reading, it didn't really explain grounding in depth, and it didn't explain the purpose of it. It seemed like it was presenting it as something which, like, if I were to use another term to describe what they're describing, I would describe as earthing instead of grounding. You know, doing a deep dive into grounding, the whole purpose is to be like a grounding wire to make sure that the excess energy running through you doesn't, you know, pop a fuse, just like electricity. So it's all about like having that sort of safe flow, but also learning how to shut down, and how to turn the psychic ability down, you know, because we don't want to be on all the time. It's not healthy to be in full psychic and magical, you know, it's not healthy to be turned up at 11 at all times, because you will either get fried like I was talking about, or you will get what in occultism they refer to as magical impact. I believe that term originated with Josephine McCarthy in her book Magical Healing. But it is something that I've experienced, and it's very much like the equivalent of energetic whiplash of, you know, it's like touching a lightning bolt. It's just, it's too much, and it does have a physical, mental, and emotional impact on you, which can be sort of hard to recover. And if we're always, you know, jumping into things without like the safety and the precaution that I feel is necessary, there is that potential of harming yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to make sure that I was teaching this in a way that would be safe to explore. And so like a lot of that has to deal with the grounding and the you know, making sure the flow is working right, but also learning how to shut down and how to get rid of that excess energy or someone else's energy, if you're like engaged in a reading.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Um, just to check in with everybody, the StreamYard is being weird. So I do see that there are comments coming in on the Facebook feed, but I can't bring them up for some reason. So hopefully that'll correct itself. But I will just read real quick. Chrisane Lane, who joined us, thank you for being here, said, same. I've been taught it's not the think of the thing, it's the feel of the thing. And I've always found that to be difficult to open up to that and stop overthinking. Absolutely. I think that's what that's always the problem, is overthinking things. Okay.
And that's also why I have as one of the very first exercises role playing. You know, this idea of, and this is what I used to do in my workshops, is I would pair people up with each other, and I would just be like, imagine you're Miss Cleo. Like, imagine you're the most psychic person ever. Don't worry about being right or wrong. Read the person, just have fun. And when people would get out of their own way, you know, when they would do the reading, there's a lot of startling accuracy. A lot of the times it's ourselves that's in our own way. It's very similar to like you write about the itty bitty shitty committee in your head. It's a very similar thing. You know, I think in all areas of life, it's often ourselves that is our
Yeah.
worst enemy.
Yeah, 100%, especially when it comes to the psychic experiences. And it's so hard. It's so hard sometimes to trust yourself, but it's also really easy to talk yourself out of what you experience. And I like the way that you approach just the idea of being open to perceiving just in the first place. And then in the next chapter, when we get into extrasensory perception, and again, you don't really love the term extrasensory
No.
perception, but when we get into that, we start to talk about like the clairsenses and things like that. The thing that to me stuck out that I loved seeing was you talk about the screen in your mind.
Mhm.
And this is something that a lot of folks, like, I don't know how many people have gone to workshops and seminars and gotten to work with like specifically psychic teachers, like people who are psychics, and you go to and that's their thing. They teach a little differently than people who are witches tend to, and it's a very similar stuff, but it's just different approaches and different ways of going about it. But in the psychic world, when I would go and I was, you know, developing my own skills and mediumship and stuff, I'd get these teachers that would be like, trying to explain like visualization and how to let things kind of be projected into your mind, and it was always like this convoluted, confusing thing, like it's a reflection of your blah blah blah. It was just so over the top ridiculous, and you I think you did a better job in like 2 paragraphs explaining something that I know I went to a workshop, like a weekend workshop for. So when we talk about the screen in your mind and being open to that perception, like, can we, I mean, I know you've got something you want to add to that, but when you do add to that, can you talk about the sensation of perceiving? Like, like, do you feel anything? Do you notice any shifts or differences? Like, are there things that you notice definitely are altered by the ability to perceive?
So when it comes to the screen of the mind specifically, and in the way that I'm using it here, because it's also used in another way, in a lot of spirituality, where it's like literally a screen, like a movie theater, which you can do as well. But the way that I teach it in the book is I teach, think of a pink unicorn or something like that. And like when you hear those words, something should have flashed somewhere, even if it was just like a millisecond. And that is the screen of your mind. And so a lot of things with psychic ability and visualization is included. They have this idea that it is a lot more like movies or television, than how it naturally comes. And what I mean by that is it tends to be very, very extreme and extravagant. And it can come through that way. But in my experience, the majority of the time it doesn't. So the same faculty that receives psychic clairvoyance, internal clairvoyance, not external, internal clairvoyance, is that same faculty in alpha of the imagination. And that's why it's so hard to discern. So, a really good example of learning where the screen of your mind is when you're reading a novel, or fiction, and you're reading it and you have some sense of what's going on somewhere. Often you can visualize, even if it's not like concrete, crystal clear, you can sort of visualize something. And for most people, it's sort of like up here, like people expect it to be here, but it tends to be a little higher. Um, it's recognizing where that faculty occurs in your mind, I believe is one of the key of then learning, like, okay, so this is the area where that information sort of does come in, because, we slip in and out of alpha all the time. And we're constantly picking things up without giving it attention. So it's very much like, if you live in a house with a lot of spirits, it's very much the same as living in a house with a lot of cats. And we have both of those. And what I mean by that is, you get so used to the cat's presence that there is cats, that you don't pay attention to them. They're just sort of background, whatever. It doesn't really strike you as like, oh my God, like look at what that cat's doing, or look at what that spirit's doing. It's just sort of they're there, and so your focus isn't on them. And I think psychic ability a lot of the times is like that, where we're getting it all the time. We just haven't stopped to actually perceive it. I hope that made sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And people in the chat are saying, yeah, like they're on board with that. They like that. Okay. Wow. Because it's actually, I mean, because we have the potential to go into a whole thing with that. Like I've got questions, but you have other books, you have other things that'll help us do that, and we'll go into those in the future. All right. So when we get into the next chapter, chapter 5, it's about purification and shielding, and I just want to talk very briefly about this because again, we got to be time conscious here. But just so very briefly, when it comes to being pure, like purified, when it comes to being clean, there's a lot of weird feelings about this kind of stuff for some reason, and I think it comes for me. I'm assuming it comes from the purity culture and things like that we grew up with, and we're just rejecting that, and that's all fine. I understand the psychology of it, but there still seems to be this idea that like, oh well, I can do a cleansing once, under the dark of the moon. That's all I need to do, and I don't need to worry about it. but we're psychic people, we're interacting with a very sticky world, right? So when it comes to purifying and purification and shielding specifically, what do you find are the best ways to, on a regular basis, keep yourself from being, covered and all of that crap, right? Because sometimes it's not, sometimes we got to do a little more work than we probably think we do, in my opinion.
Yeah, I go more in depth with that in my second book, Mastering Magic with Techniques, particularly techniques that involve things. Whereas this book, I have a strong emphasis of like no tools, no items. It's just you, yourself, and you can't really say you, yourself, and I, but you know what I mean. Um, I think cleansing, you can cleanse once a month, just like you can bathe once a month, and, maybe that works for you, but it may not work for the people that have to interact with you. And a lot of psychic ability and magic is about interaction. It's about connecting with people, with information, with spirits, with energy. So that cleansing isn't so much a moral thing. It's not like the sense of like Christianity, as an example, since that's what I was raised in, where it's like this notion of sin and cleansing your sins. It's not like that at all. It's more about making sure that your vehicle, and I mean that as even beyond the body, like all your energetic sheaths and your energetic faculties are clean and clear so that they can operate at the best efficiency in both receiving information but also projecting that information out as energetic will. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, perfect.
and one of the things that I did differently is a lot of books start off with shielding and protection, especially because a lot of people, if it's a beginner book, there's a lot of worries about like, fears that the reader may have when approaching these subjects. But I chose to put it a little later because I thought that learning a visualization and then also the basics of running energy was important so that you actually are putting energy into that shielding and that cleansing, and it's not just sort of a weak thought form.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a very good, powerful chapter. There's good stuff, but I know in the book that follows, there's a lot of exercises, which is fantastic. And well, I guess we'll have to do a book club about that. I've been asked if we're going to do a Mastering Magic book club, and I was like, well, I guess we have to, don't we?
People want it.
Yeah. All right. So, chapter 6, the Triple Souls of the Witch. We're just gonna kind of glide through this one because this is luckily now a topic that's much more people are talking about it than they used to. Like when this came out, I think maybe 3 or 4 of us, like you included, like had really tried to even trudge that stuff, that territory. But it's also not. I mean, it's also hella old. It's not like it's a brand new concept by any means, right?
Yeah.
And so when it comes to this idea of this 3 souls, a lot of people just want to compare it or contrast it to the chakras. Like, oh, this is an easier version of the chakras, or oh, it's a white version of the chakras, right? Like I feel like there's still, even after you wrote what you wrote, I mean, you've got 3 chapters here about basically the 3 souls. And I wrote what I wrote. Storm wrote what he wrote. Thorn has written what they wrote. We've got all these people who've been writing about it. People still don't quite understand it because at some point somebody compared it to the chakras and they just clicked it off in their head. What do you, when we think of it from that perspective, what are the big differences between the chakras and the 3 souls?
How would I explain this? There's a metaphor coming. I need to pull it through. So the best way to explain it is that the souls or the selves are literally you. They're what makes you up. It's your identity. Whereas chakras, at least in the way that the West views them and works with them, that's much more about like energetic flow, and your relation to that area of life. Um, so it's more of like a what's the term I want to use? Like an input output, whereas the three selves is more of like operating models. Um, so, and like that's where my mind, I'm trying to like pull like a computer or an app sort of idea, but it's sort of like if us, the idea of us as all of it is a computer. Um, these the three selves are the operating systems within that computer that are running simultaneously. And chakras would be more sort of like apps that access different things. Um,
That's actually a
if that
really good
makes
way of.
sense.
No, that's really good. Yeah, that's perfect actually. And I think I'm gonna put that in my pocket because I like that. I like that analogy. That's really good. Okay, let's move on because we're gonna dive a little further into this concept of the three souls. Chapter 7 is the lower self in the shadow, and the
Mhm.
concept of the shadow. Again, people are probably very familiar with. To me, out of this chapter, that the topic that kind of rose to the top is like the cream, would really be this idea of self-possession. Okay,
Mhm.
so it's it's something that I mean, to me, it's like that's what you get when you do the shadow work. Essentially, why is self-possession so important as a witch?
Yeah, so it's really funny because this is the one that I've had like pushback from people that didn't actually read it, that mm, maybe just turned a witch and then decide to make a YouTube video the next day. Because they compared it to demons, like being possessed by demons, but it's not like that. When I use the term self possession, I use it in the sense that T. Thorne Coyle is using it, which is about being in possession of yourself, being in control of yourself. And the shadow is a very big part of that. The shadow has been used and sort of like, once again, going back to spiritual lingo and how it changes. When I talk about shadow, I'm talking about Carl Jung and how Jung discusses the shadow. So it's all these aspects of ourselves that we are unaware of, whether it's because it hasn't been brought to our attention or whether we are intentionally ignoring it. But they are still aspects of ourselves. It's still part of ourselves. And Carl Jung's whole theory was when these things are not addressed, when they're not given healthy ways to be integrated in our sense of identity and within our life, they control us in ways that we don't realize. They control our emotions. They control how we interact, how we project on other people, things of that nature. And because it's given the word shadow, people usually go to a really kind of spooky imagery type place with it, but it's not like that at all. Yes, it can be a lot of like really painful and hard things that we're intentionally choosing not to look at, but it can also be other things. So, one of the examples that I like to give to show that it's not all like dark and spooky is Marie Kondo. So, Marie Kondo, everyone remembers her of the like, she the minimalism housekeeping. She was a Shinto priestess before this, so she's very very spiritual. But she talked about in interviews that I saw that as a little girl she had a feeling of not being in control of what was going on in her life, and so the way that she would gain control is she would overly organized and overly clean. And so, like her whole childhood, during recess, she would isolate herself to clean. It just took over her whole life of making tidiness and cleanliness be such an overriding thing because it gave her a sense of control that it then began deteriorating other areas of her life. And a lot of that had to deal with living life and social interactions. So the way that she healthily integrated the shadow aspect once it was recognized was she then started a service where she would go and help other people go through this process. So it's the same thing that's still there, but now it's being reframed and repurposed so that she's interacting with people. She's going all around the world. She's living life. And often that's how the shadow works with us. You know, when we're not giving it attention, it's very much like a small child or an animal, which is very lower self imagery. You know, when they're trying to get your attention and they'll act up and they'll throw a fit and they'll start barking. Well, hopefully it's the dog that's barking, but it's very much the same. So, you know, I believe that shadow work absolutely is an integral part of that self-possession of, you know, I say in the book, I use the metaphor of, you know, either we can see the body as a haunted house with unknown spirits roaming through it and wreaking havoc like poltergeist, or we can put the work in and make it a divine temple where we have personal and relatable and um, purposeful interaction with those spirits in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, okay, yeah, that's a lot of stuff to chew on there. All right, moving along. So, chapter 8, we've got the higher self and true will. And my question for this chapter
Mhm,
is about divine purpose. It's the
mhm,
concept of divine purpose. Um, you make a pretty a pretty interesting kind of point in this chapter about true will and how that's connected to divine purpose. Can we talk on that a little bit? And specifically, I would like to know what your thoughts are and how this relates to our path as witches.
okay. It may or may not relate to our path as witches. So, true will is a term that was coined by Aleister Crowley. It is the central idea of his religion, Thelema. Thelema is named after true will. Thelema in Greek is the word will. So he differentiates it from the idea of personal will. It's not willpower. It's not, once again, that force. It's more about flow and alignment. So the idea of true will is that every person has a purpose on life. There's a reason we incarnated. And so this is dictated before we incarnate. You know, we dictate may not be the right word, but our higher self has a purpose for us incarnating. There's a reason for us to incarnate. And that reason we refer to as true will. So, you know, there's this divine aspect to the sort of mission we have in life. And it may be spiritual or it may not be spiritual. You know, it's very different for every person. You can't really, you know, put a universal everyone has the same true will because, you know, as we know, not everyone has the same purpose and mission in this incarnation. um, so true will is this concept of a lot of times it's compared to the Buddhist concept of dharma, Buddhist Hindu concept of dharma. um, which yes and no. You know, Thelema doesn't have so much of a emphasis on the idea of like karma or anything like that. Um, but yeah, I mean, true will is essentially your divine purpose of why you are alive. So that doesn't mean that it has to be something spiritual. Using the Dharma comparison, a good reference to look at how it cannot be spiritual but still be your divine purpose is the story of Arjuna and Krishna, where he was a soldier and he had to fight in a war. And he's like, Krishna, I'm not gonna fight. I want to be ahimsa. I want to be peace because I'm spiritual. And like Krishna's like, it is your dharma to be a soldier. So you got to go soldier. And I think that's you know, like some people are meant to be healers, some people are meant to be teachers, some people are meant to be parents, you know, which is all of those things. And I think you can't really put
Yeah,
a cookie cutter, you know, on what everyone's true will is.
yeah, absolutely. Chapter 9 is Flames of the Witch's Soul.
Yes.
and it's a short one. It's a really easy, digestible, like, but it's very poignant. It's
Mhm.
very important as well to me,
Yes.
right? So the Trinity of the Soul, and then the Witch Fire.
Mhm.
What is the Witch Fire, Matt? And why did you find it important to put in your in Psychic Witch and not Mastering Magic or another book?
Yeah. So, what I'm referring to is soul alignment, and the term that's used in different traditions in different ways. Either it's like the witch's fire, the witch's flame. I'm sure there's other names for it. But essentially, it's this idea of if we have three operating systems, right? Like three selves, and we put them together. So the metaphor I give in it is Power Rangers, which is like the Zords, right? Like you have these individual Zords, and they're all kind of doing their thing, but then they come together to become the Megazord, and the Megazord is like more powerful than everything else. That's very similar to soul alignment, and when soul alignment occurs, this phenomenon occurs, which we refer to as the witch fire, the witch flame. And a lot of this was heavily influenced in my training with you, and exploring also a lot of fairy tradition type ideas and practices. But I believe it's essentially the state of energetic alignment where all of you is together. So one of the things I talk about in magic, in where people go wrong, is that their will is divided amongst themselves. And I don't mean will as in like true will, though that is a part when you consider the higher self. But it's this idea of making sure that all of you is in alignment with what you're doing. And that is an energetic state when these things come together. Like it does create a force in the aura, which I perceive as sort of um, like a plasma, I guess would be the word. Like it's almost like a liquidy type fire is the way that I perceive it. But it brings power to the magic that you're casting because all of you is in alignment with it. And I think, so going back, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but like going back to like I talk about like where people go wrong in magic, you know, um, you could, for example, be casting a love spell, but if there's a part of you that feels you're not worthy of love, you're not fully in alignment with it, and this is where affirmations and neuroplasticity and all that stuff. So when you go even grander from that, if when you bring your physical body, your emotional body, your mental body, your spiritual essence, your higher self into it, when you have all of those things working together, I believe that that's when the magic is very, very powerful. So I feel like, let's give people like strong magic, like right off the
Mhm.
bat, like because the whole point of the book, as I open it, I say, my point is not to prove to you like a car salesman that magic is real or psychic ability is real, but like I want to show you exercises and have you experience them and have you decide,
Yeah.
if it's real or not.
Well, it's also like, how else do you actually prove to yourself that magic is real to the point where you can continue, you want to continue to do it? Like
Right.
the thing with spells and people like, jumping in and dabbling and things like that
Mhm.
is that like they'll do something, it doesn't work, and then they just assume all of magic is bullshit,
Right.
and or the opposite, right? And for me, it's like you have to seek a reason to shift and create and to do those things so that you can prove to yourself that it is a real thing, it is valuable, and it can be meaningful. It doesn't need to be meaningful in the same way, but that it's possible, and that you can, so that when you go to do it again, you don't have the doubt in the way that you did the first time, the second
Yeah,
time, the third time.
and not just that, but it's very much like if I were to pick up your guitar and try playing it, I could easily convince myself that, wow, this instrument makes horrible noises,
Mm. Yeah,
you know?
right.
And it's not about like
Yeah,
music, it's not about the guitar, it's about my relationship with it and the time I
100%.
put into it and how serious I took it and things of
Yeah,
that nature.
yeah, 100%. Okay, chapter 10. um so between the worlds and the kind of breakdown of that chapter is the butterfly effect, holographic reality, and the magic circle.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, we're just going to go off of what I was impressed by, the thing that I thought was cool. And people, if you have questions, go ahead and do put them up. But I'm trying to go and hit the things that I know people have asked or people have brought up.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about holographic reality, because this is the thing that to me was like really cool and really fascinating. And I liked how you included it where you did. I like how you used it to bridge that idea of magical effectiveness and the magic circle and so on and so forth. So let's talk about that for just a second. So the idea of the holographic reality, because you approach it like to me in the way that it was meant to be kind of approached,
Mm-hmm.
not like I've seen in other things on Amazon, but like you approach it in a very grounded way, which and very, again, meaningful, practical way. So we're going to talk about your concept with the holographic reality.
Yeah. So this chapter is a lot of Hermeticism basics, um, presented in a way that I feel would be a little bit more understandable and more contextualized for people, other than just axioms from, the Emerald Tablet. Um, but the holographic reality, what I'm referring to is essentially the Emerald Tablet axiom of as above, so below, as within, so without. So hologram, we think of hologram and we think of like a projected image, and that's not what I mean. I mean, what a hologram is it's a piece where every fractal in it contains the whole within that piece, and those pieces make the whole. And that is like one of the like key foundational ideas behind Hermeticism, which a lot of our magic comes from historically. So it's this idea of, the effect that we have on our inner world has an effect on the outer world. As within, so without, as above, so below, vice versa. Everything's interconnected. Everything contains within it um, the bigger piece, the bigger energetic piece. And we could even think of this as the idea of like, um, if we want to use like a science analogy, which is not going to be perfect, but if we were to think of it as the idea of the Big Bang, right? Like everything once was something, everything was a singularity. So everything still has that sort of informational blueprint in it. But it's this idea of then, I talk about the butterfly effect, which is the idea of, the notion of, a butterfly flaps its wings in like Japan and then Australia gets like a tsunami. Just this idea of something very small has a chain reaction of something much larger. It is this idea that everything that we do, everything that, we purposefully, not even purposefully, like if we want to be really realistic, but everything that we do, everything that we think, everything that we put energy into has an effect on the greater reality, whether we are conscious of it or not. Just like the butterfly probably has no idea of that tsunami that it caused. So, Hermeticism has such a strong focus, and I identify with a lot of Hermeticism. I love a lot of Hermeticism, but it has this focus on mastering the mind, so that you can consciously co-create and you can consciously align with, the creator of however you perceive it, the greater creator.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not necessarily important to everybody, but I think just as a human, like trying to make sense of everything, like that type of work means the most to me. Like it gives me the most peace and the most reassurance that like I'm doing what I'm doing and I'm connected to something that's, bigger than me. And I find that to be very empowering. But I know that a lot of people find it strange or maybe even find it a little scary. And
Well,
that's
and
okay.
and this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation when we were talking about like, like how I approach like celebrating and promoting other people and myself and not getting in that energy of like just the yucky feels, towards people or people's work, because it is all of this stuff. It's this idea of it's the energy we're touching and the effect we're making in our reality. I don't believe, as within, so without, as without, so within. Like, just like if we cast the evil eye, I believe that the magic that we cast, the magic that we put out into the world, we can never separate ourselves from fully.
Yeah.
And that's why, while I'm not anti baneful magic or cursing, I'm absolutely for making sure that it's justified and that it's being used in a proper manner that's not like bullying or like terrorism, because there is the magical equivalent of that, I believe.
Yeah.
uh, you know
See, I was just thinking about
Nuance.
this. Yeah, it is nuance, right? And I was just thinking about this the other day. For me, it's like, well, that's my knife, right? Like that's me. It's my knife or my gun or my whatever. And so if I'm not going to like physically go grab a gun to go defend myself, I'm not going to go just reach to magic to defend myself.
Mhm.
And I mean that in that way of like, I kind of have to be in a place and like something has to be happening in order for me to feel like that is justified for
Right.
me and my own personal stuff. And this comes out of years, 20 fucking years now of no, over 20, oh God, 25 years of being a witch and being a dumb witch who would just take care of business because business needed to be taken care of. And I'm going to blah, blah, blah. And I was such a hoity-toity bullshit, right? And what I learned is like, eventually, it took a long time, but what I eventually learned was like, oh, actually, when my life is going really great, none of this bullshit is around me anyway. So if I'm just focusing on what I want and creating what I need, and I'm focusing on me right now, like the things that agitate me or that put me in a position where I need to be cursey McCurserson
Mhm.
don't exist. They are not part of that vibration. They just aren't. And
Yeah.
and that has been really trippy
And
to like, because you hear that's like a new age thing, right? You hear like, it's not your vibration, but it's fucking real. Like there's truth to it. And that's been a big thing for me, just embracing that and realizing like, no, like I need to create at my level, not at somebody else's. And that's difficult sometimes. I thought you wanted to say, I was like,
I did, but I totally forgot what I was
oh,
gonna say.
yeah. I know we've been
I
going
was
out for a minute.
listening.
I know. Thank you everybody for hanging out. We're getting there. We're getting there. And if you remember, just jump back in, Matt.
Oh, I do. I do.
Oh yeah.
So like, yeah, what you said was like, I had an article a while back, that was just like, this is my observation of watching my fellow witches in the community for a very long time and seeing the ones that are like super curse happy, like they will curse you because you looked at them the wrong way, versus, people who either don't curse or they curse in a justified hexing justice type way. Is that the thing with magic, especially when you don't track magic and you don't keep a journal, or you aren't mindful of your life, is magic often manifests in ways that we don't realize it's manifested. And I'm not talking specifically about curses, but like when we do XYZ spell, often it occurs in a way that feels natural in our lives and it doesn't feel like magic, even though it was magic.
Mm-hmm.
Cursing is very, very similar,
Mm-hmm.
where you can see it a lot clearer as an outsider that this person has been cursing everyone, and now all of a sudden everything in their life is slowly falling apart, and all this other drama starts coming in, and they have more reasons that they need to start cursing and hexing. And so I think it's because you can't separate yourself from your magic. So it's all about being mindful of how you're using that magic. And I know that sounds very preachy, but I'm very big on, everyone should come up with their own ethics and their own morals and their own relationship with magic. And a lot of times, it's fuck around and find out. Sometimes there's that meme going around of like Gen Z has just discovered Mad Dog 2020, and like everyone else is like, oh my God,
Like, have fun,
but
right?
it's one of those, like, there are some harsh lessons you just
Yes.
need to learn
Yep.
firsthand.
Yeah. I mean, some people go to New Orleans and buy the grenade over and over and over again, and they you shouldn't.
Yeah.
Here's the thing: there's being preachy, and then there's just kind of being people who've been around for a minute and been like, "Hey, you might want to avoid that pothole." Like it, and there's to me, it's two different things, and it really is like when it comes to just. I get it, because you want to fuck around, you can find out. Like, I am at 1000% that person, but at the flip side of it, I'm going to avoid it like the plague. I am going to, if I have to be that person, I have to be in a really dark place in order to go there, and I will, and God help everyone, and that is what it is. But please
Yes,
don't make me. Please
I
don't, like, I don't want to do it, you
see,
know?
and that's the thing is that almost 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 all of the time, there's other magic you can do that will solve the situation for you and your life without
Absolutely.
having to go that route.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely. And it's hard. It's super hard. And and it really is like, you got to be a little more creative. You got to be a little more like thinking outside the box with stuff in order to do that a lot of the times, but absolutely. And yeah, there's the like silver raven wolf, put him in a bottle and send him down a river kind of a thing. That to me is very, very nice. And then there's the, no, I'm going to be pokey now and I'm going to spike, like, and you're going to, what it Cinderquill was, I think that's the Pokemon that spikes out its little quills. I like to think of myself like a porcupine. Like, I can be nice and smooth, but then I can be very pokey. I can be Pokey McPokerson. I said that for the chat room because they've been giggling over Cursey McCurserson. Okay. Let's get to chapter
I mean, we
11.
could have a whole
Yeah,
episode on
right.
that, so.
Seriously, we probably should sit down. I think people would like us to have a conversation at that level. But let's talk about chapter 11. So it's about elemental forces. And to me, again, I'm just going to talk about the cream of the crop here. To me, your section on quintessence was so valuable, just as a person who teaches magic, because quintessence is one of these things people just don't talk about. Like, they assume it is something that maybe is a little more complicated or a little more out there. And it's also usually called something else. So in your work, you refer to it as quintessence, but in other work, it is referred to as.
Well, it depends. So this is where we get into, again, the tricky area of language, right? Um, so quintessence can mean several things. It could be just simply the fifth element of spirit, but it can also be used in the term of like quintessential, like something's intrinsic nature. But usually in occultism, it's we're talking about this fifth element, and I expand on it in the next book, from exploring Ivo Dominguez Jr.'s work and conversations with him, and just exploring the concept on my own through interactual sort of basis. I now see it as three aspects of, so I see it as fifth elements, which is weird because, you would think like sixth, seventh, but it's the same sort of energy. So quintessence, I refer to as being sort of the membrane between what we might call spirit, and we might call it ether. So in Mastering Magic, I refer to the God acronym for the concept of spirit as an element. And I give the whole triplicities, but quintessence would be that, how would I put it? It's like, so it ties in both of those definitions of, spirit, but also the thing that makes it intrinsic. So in the way that I use quintessence is it's very much like that divine spark within things. And I feel like that's the membrane between, ether and then spirit. It's a very complicated subject, which I go into more in Mastering Magic. But it's one of those words you can just use a lot of different ways. In this book, I'm using it as the word for spirit or the fifth element.
It's
In
almost as
Mastering.
if you have a series you're writing, and this sets things up for a second book. It's almost, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that's definitely, and that's what I love is people who like got into Psychic Witch absolutely need to read Mastering Magic, because it takes all of this like deep, like it's suddenly like things become 4D. Like it's a really cool, thing. Okay, so chapter 12, terrestrial energy. this is all right. Again, so the earth is alive, syncing with the earth's imagination, and then the spirits of place. So to me, the thing that's always trippy is that we think of earth and we just kind of relegate it to being one of those alchemical points on the pentacle, and we don't really think of it as a functioning system that we are part of. And so when you wrote this, it was like, fuck yeah, like it was, because you're talking about it really as if it were part of that system, that of our own energy body, right? And how it plays into things. So can you talk a little bit about your particular kind of approach here when it comes to the earth and how it relates to the system
Yeah.
that we work with as psychics?
So in that chapter, when I say Earth, I'm referring to our planet. Our planet as both a physical entity as well as a spiritual entity, as opposed to the element. So when I wrote the chapter before that on the four elements, I one of the things I tried to really drive home, because it wasn't in a lot of books, is this sort of watered down idea, the elements of being the symbol of their name. And so, what I mean by that is the original concept of the four elements didn't think it was actual fire, didn't think it was actual earth, didn't think it was actual water. These are metaphors of how the energy feels, how it interacts, how it moves, And I think in a lot of neo paganism, particularly like in the 80s and the 90s, we sort of lost that sense of that depth. So I definitely was really happy when Ivo Dominguez Jr. then just recently, like last year, released Four Elements of the Wise, because then he dives into this and like way better than I could. But when it comes to the earth in this chapter, as I'm talking about like, the entity of the earth, uh, whether you want to call it Gaia or Pachamama or like whatever cultural name you want to put on it. If you want to put on the just vague Mother Nature, same thing. What I found really interesting is I talk about how the Schumann resonance in that, and that the Earth is always having these electrical discharges in the atmosphere, and researchers have compared it to brain activity, that it functions in very similar ways and very similar um, 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 ways. Sorry, I just kind of sort of mind blinked. But the Schumann resonance is the frequency that the Earth itself is pretty much continuously in. And what's interesting is if you do compare that to brainwave activity, it's the same frequency as alpha, which is the state that Robert Beck, a physicist, discovered that a lot of witches and shamans and psychics and healers of different types, when they would engage in their activity, their brain would go into alpha. So I found that there's this really interesting connection that, like, like we're tuning into the same frequency that the earth itself is, which I find totally fascinating, especially since a lot of these practices are very earth centric.
Yeah, absolutely. And and that's the whole thing, is like the earth is the system that contains earth, air, fire, water, right? And spirit. And it is the thing in which those things interact. It is yeah, I love the way that again, the way you approach it. So chapter 13, celestial energies. Um Planetary correspondences, doctrine of signatures. Planetary correspondences, that everybody felt pretty comfortable with, but the doctrine of signatures is something that usually is just kind of like skimmed. It's just kind of like, it's referenced a lot, but not really explained. And you do a really good job at doing both. And so, can we talk about how the doctrine of signatures for you comes up as an important aspect of celestial energy itself, and why you incorporate that and look for those elements in your magic?
Yeah. So the doctrine of signatures is essentially this idea that um, everything, plants, metals, all these things essentially are imbued with a planetary energy. And so a lot of the ways that the old alchemists and the occultists discovered, you know, like that, like, oh, this plant is like ruled by Mercury. You know, it wasn't just that they were making it up or they were just pulling it out of their ass or it was their own gnosis. Like there was a method that they started discovering that, like, you know, like, hey, these plants have these effects that are mercurial in medicine. So what that means is it may affect the mind or it may affect the speech. And through observing the plant, they would see that, you know, it may grow a certain way. You know, there's certain things that they could see. I'm trying to think of who it was, but the 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 man in the first century who wrote De Materia Medica. Um, but essentially, it's this idea that, like, you know, so I go more in depth in this in Mastering Magic too. So just like the elements are not a physical thing. The four elements exist throughout all of the universe. So do the planetary powers. It's just different octaves of energetic signature. So just like everything in physical reality contains one or more of the four elements, everything also contains one or more of the planetary energy, like archetypal energies.
Yeah, so it's how the whole web essentially is constructed, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, you go into it in your next book, and we will definitely end up, I know, diving into it again. But it is one of those things that if when people were reading it and when people read this book, that I feel like you explain it so well and you do it so succinctly that it sums up a lot of confusion that I definitely know comes later when people
Yeah, I
start
don't
to
even remember how I
spells.
explained it.
And you did a good job. But like when it comes to spells and things like that, like people get they don't understand. They think it's just ingredients. They don't understand that those ingredients are keys, right?
No, and
You,
I
yeah,
go so hard in the next book about, like, I hate
you
the
really do.
word ingredient or people
Yeah,
treating
yeah.
things like ingredients as in their magic.
We do not do that.
No.
Yes. Okay. All right. So there are two more chapters, but really we're just going to talk about one because the last
Yeah.
chapter is psychic spells and magic tricks, which
Mhm.
is great again for kind of proving that magic is real and putting a lot of the things that you talk about in the book into practice.
Uh-huh.
But in the chapter 14, which is multi-dimensional manifestation,
That's one of my favorite chapters.
yeah, it's my favorite. It is my favorite chapter because it feels like, and this is why I'm like, oh, it's definitely a series, because it feels like we get through all of this really cool stuff, and I'm thinking like this book is cooking, and then we hit this chapter, and this chapter feels like it's a spark that's igniting the series. It feels like it's the spark that really gets everything tumbling. So this idea of multi-dimensional manifestation,
Mhm.
of being a witch who is multi-dimensional, which is what we've been talking about this whole book as we've been reading it, right? This is basically what it's all being leading up to. So I just want to distill it a little bit. There's one particular topic in that in this chapter, which is
Mhm.
reality maps, that I want to hit on, that I want to make sure we hit on. I know you've got things you want to talk about with this chapter,
Uh-huh.
but can we start with reality maps? Can we start with
Yeah.
the concept of, again, why that's important? Because we talked about reality in chapter 1, right?
Right.
And and how that's constructed. So now we are revisiting the concept of reality again.
Yeah. So reality maps is a term referencing the maps we use to navigate cosmologies, whether it's cosmologies of the self or it's cosmologies of the universe in either a smaller or grander sense. And the reason it's a reality map is because we don't know for certain. This is not an objective thing. This is something that a lot of exploration and a lot of work is anecdotal, even when it's gnosis, even when it's a spirit given, even when we astral project to those planes, it's very experiential and we only have experiential information to go on. And a lot of times those don't always sync up. So reality models are useful models that help us navigate realities of the universe or the self. So, for example, in Western occultism, Kabbalah with a Q is a reality map. The Tree of Life is a reality map. But essentially, it's this idea of plotting things, so we have a frame of reference to work with it, based off of like experience and gnosis that has come through, so that we're not just sort of trying to work blindly. So the reality map that I give is the one that I think makes the most sense. Um, and this actually, like, some of this goes more in depth in my new tarot book coming out, which is available for pre-order. But it's this idea of what the old occultists used to refer to as the inner planes. And the inner planes is essentially, um, so if this outer reality, this physical reality that we can see, we can observe with science, is the outer planes. The inner planes, um, is those subtle realities running through all of it. And I use the word multidimensional because, although that is sort of a more new agey, sort of fringe science type term, it's accurate. It's this idea that there's dimensions within this reality, but it's not like layered like a cake, even though, as a reality map, that helps us understand it and put it in a frame of reference. It's happening simultaneously through all the things. And so we access the inner planes by going inwards. That is the easiest way. So a lot of discussion of the inner planes and the levels of reality is this idea that we exist on all of those realities as well, and our existence on those realities, um, we perceive it in this third dimensional reality as the auric layers, and so I present what seems to be the standard agreed upon classical definitions of those planes and those layers of the aura. But I changed some of the language so that it makes more sense, and that we're not drawing off cultures that we don't need to, because they were trying to explain a term. So, like, instead of saying like Ketheric template, which refers to like the highest sphere on the tree of life in Kabbalah, I just use the word divine. I don't need to talk about a Buddhic plane to talk about, the idea that, like, no, this is what, when they describe what's going on, is it's a psychic plane that they're discussing. So when we are casting magic, my experience and what I teach in this book is just like I was saying, like with soul alignment, we want all of our parts together to work our will, right? So when we're casting magic, we're pushing it through all of these inner planes at the same time, or hopefully we are, to get the strongest result in our magic. And so I go through both the internal, like the inner type magic, if you're just doing sort of a mental manifestation, as well as the procedures in standard ritual, which actually hit on these points. But it's essentially the idea of these different components that you bring in to make your magic touch those different inner planes for manifestation. Am I making sense, or am I rambling?
No, you're answering you're answer the question, and you're adding stuff about obviously what you talked about in the chapter. But this is all stuff that leads into, I mean, and you do a great job, summarizing it, but it really leads into stuff that, again, in the next book, right? You get to implement, you get to play with in a way, that otherwise maybe not. So you are answering the question. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah. No, I mean, I just, yeah, I mean, that's essentially it. Is like, I feel like for me, there is a checklist of things to incorporate in your spell casting to make sure it hits all of those levels. And that it's as basic as conjuring the emotion,
Yeah.
Holding the words, holding the image, creating the container of the space, all of these hits on those
Yeah.
levels.
Absolutely. Okay, that's Psychic Witch by Mat Auryn. That's and we could easily have spent 6 hours talking about everything, because there's so much in it. You did a fantastic job at packing a whole lot in this book, which is why people recommend it so much. Like you've got a lot in there, and you also do a really good job at recommending other resources for people. Like you do a fantastic, because you're really good at helping just kind of get the word out there.
I just lost my train of thought again.
It's because you're hungry, because I haven't cooked you dinner yet. That's because we're past dinner time. But so I'm gonna go let's wrap this up, because it's taco time. But I can for me, Psychic Witch, again, it came in at a really good time when the world was starting to look inward, and it gave a lot of people tools to do that. And I love that. I love that it exists. I love that it is something that I get to reference now as a teacher. And it really, beyond our relationship, it's a good book. Like, it really genuinely is. It's something that you should be proud of. Obviously, 200,000 copies have sold. That is something that I'm going to brag for you, because you don't like to do it, but that's something that is incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. Most books are doing really good if they can sell 5,000 copies in 4 years. Like, that's incredible for the genre. You've outdone that many times over, and it really, the book has outdone that many times over, because the book is incredible. It's a good book. It's a good piece of material that a lot of people are gonna be able to use for a long time. So as a reader, thank you for writing that. As your husband, thank you for writing that, because I love that it's in my life. Like, I can't go anywhere without Psychic Witch being part of my day. And it's a really good reminder to be authentic with my magic, and to explore my abilities in relation to the world that I want to manifest.
Yeah. And I do remember what I was going to say, which is a very kind of wrap up thing, which is, it's really hard to do this book in a month. You can read it in a month, but like, to actually do it, if you were to really focus on it, it should take you about a year. And that's with a lot of focus and dedication. It probably would take about 2 years to get through all the material and give it the time that the different exercises require. So it is a book that is more than just like a read and set down. Like, it is a guidebook.
Yeah. And I tell people too, like, get your copy, and inside your copy, make notes. Like, I don't know if Matt is giving you permission, but I'm giving you permission as somebody who uses books. Like, if you're really, if this is part of your life, it's okay to write in the margins. It's okay to dog ear things, because that means you're using it, right? Like, and it's a paperback book. You can get another one if something happens or you need to give it to somebody. But if there's something about this, is so easy to turn into a manual for life and a journal for the experiences that we have as witches, that it's great. Like, it's a beautiful thing. I'm so glad it exists.
Yeah. And when I wrote it, I wanted to write something that would be good for beginners, but that also touched on depth, the things that I like talking about and exploring with people. So, I've had people like read it at one point in their lives, and then like 4 years later reread it and be like, oh wow, there's a lot in here that I didn't realize how deep it was.
Yeah.
So,
because it does. It's a well. That book is a well. It just keeps, there's stuff that keeps coming out. Okay, everybody, thank you for joining us. We know we ran a little bit longer. I think we should just plan for an hour and a half next time. Next time we do a book club, because this is second time we've gone a little over. But this month rather, we're doing Houseplant Horticulture, which is my new book that just dropped. And Matt is going to be in the hot seat I'll be in the hot seat. Matt's going to be grilling me next time. And it's a short book that is loaded with info. And I hope that as people are getting it this week, because I know that it's already started to ship out. And as you get it, I hope that you enjoy it, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it. But Matt is going to be asking the questions next time. Yeah. So, I'm a little scared. I'm not gonna lie, because you asked pretty like intense questions, like really. Anyway, all right, everybody, thank you so much. It means the world to us that you decided to spend time with us. Matt, is there any final thoughts?
Yes, one last thing I wanted to mention. If you would like to come learn these things in Psychic Witch and Mastering Magic in person this year, I am doing a retreat at Omega in New York, an in-person retreat from September 29th to October 4th. You can go to my website, which is auryn.net. /omega, or just go to auryn.net. You'll see the little thing for it. Click it. I would love for you to be there, so that way we can do this work like in person and learn these core skills. I'm really excited about it. So
Yeah, that
come
sounds
join us.
so fun. It sounds so fun. I'm excited. I can't wait. It's going to be awesome. Okay, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. We will see you next month for book club, wherever, like the end of this month, probably. We'll schedule it. You let us know. And thank you for being here. Bye.